I told you before, I didn't want you to read this crap. I never saw such rotten crap in my life. Where do you get this shit?
This is a true story. It didn't happen to me, but to my friend back in 2009. It's a really scary story, and it stuck with me all these years, so I wanted to share it. I'm going to try to retell the story as best I can. My friend, who we'll call Kate here, had a friend over, and they were home alone at her parents' house. They were in the living room on the ground floor, which had big windows going from the floor to the ceiling on one side, with a sliding door which led to the front lawn, with some trees and the main road close by. They had neighbors, but they did live a little outside of town, so not really a crowded place. Kate and her friend were chilling on the sofa facing the windows, chatting and relaxing, when suddenly a man walked up to the windows. He was wearing nothing but a pair of ripped jean shorts, and this was during the summer break in the middle of the day. He stood there for a little while just staring at them, but he suddenly grabbed a hold of the sliding door and tried to open it. Kate and her friend got really spooked, but sat there frozen just watching this man. And thankfully the door was locked so he couldn't get in. When the door wouldn't open, the man started knocking on the door harder and harder while staring at the girls. And then he stopped and backed up a few steps. He picked up some rocks and started throwing them at the windows. When Kate told me this story, she said at this point she was getting seriously freaked out, and her mind panicked, but she couldn't move. She was so scared. The man stopped throwing the rocks and then started looking around. He spotted something to the right and started moving towards it, and Kate didn't understand it at the time. But the man had spotted the front door, which was located on the right side of the house, and he was moving fast. Thankfully, her friend had a better reaction than Kate, and when she told me this, she said her friend jumped over the back of the sofa and sprinted to the front door. She managed to lock it in time before the man reached it. He still grabbed at the doorknob and tried to open it, but to no avail. He stood there for a few seconds before he finally grabbed a bike they had outside and rode away. Kate and her friend were so scared, trying to understand what had just happened, and a little while later, the police showed up. I'm not sure if they called them or if the police were just checking with nearby houses if they had seen anything, because apparently the man had just escaped from a psych ward, and the police were looking for him. The girls were so lucky he didn't get into the house. They have no clue of what his intentions were, if he was just looking for a place to hide or something else. Some days later, after she told the story, the incident was written about in the local newspaper. The man was eventually found by the police and was now back where he escaped from. It didn't say anything about why he was at a psych ward in the first place, and it had no mention of Kate or her friend or what happened to them, only that the man had been found. Here is a story of a strange encounter I've had on a very haunted, maybe fucking cursed property. At 16, I was responsible for getting my 7-year-old sister on the bus for school. I always had to get her dressed, fed, and tie her hair up in a ponytail. One morning I was sick, but I got her up as usual and got her off to school. I was super nauseous and laid on the couch with a trash can next to me. And the TV was playing some cartoon on Disney, and I had my arm covering my eyes as I lay there. I was dozing off as I heard my sister come into the living room and say, "Sissy, will you tie my hair up?" Not really thinking, my eyes still being covered, I held my hand out waiting for her to place the hair tie in my palm. This thing must have realized it couldn't give me what I was asking for, and right at the same time I realized that I had already gotten my sister on the bus, and this thing standing next to me wasn't my sister at all. As I sat up, Spooked as all hell, the damn thing ran off, and I could hear its footsteps running through the kitchen and down the hallway. I didn't see anything. No apparition, just sounds. I walked to my grandmother's house about a block away, and shortly after I moved in with her because my mother and I just couldn't get along. Weird things like that happened all the time on that property, but I didn't expect anything to follow me to my grandmother's. 2 weeks after moving in, I was in my room with the door cracked. I was home alone, and it was late. My brother, 15 at the time, was always at the neighbor's house and would stop in to shower, eat, and sleep. I heard him come in, go to his room, and fiddle around, and I could hear him talking like he was on the phone with someone. So I called for him. He didn't respond, so I assumed he was pranking me. I got up and left my room, and his bedroom door across the hall was closed and locked. I stuck my thumbnail into the keyhole and popped it open, planning to scare him. When I opened the door, his lights were off, and the room was dark and empty. I flipped the light on and started investigating. I opened the closet, looked under his desk, and assumed he went out the window and was going to come back in and scare me. When I checked the windows, they were bolted, something my grandmother had done to keep him from sneaking out. I was perplexed and then spooked. I left his room to go check the rest of the house, and as I was walking down the hallway and into the living room, I heard someone running hard behind me, and as I turned around, nothing ran right through me and took my breath away. I fell to the floor, feeling like I got socked in the gut, and when I came to, I ran next door to find my brother passed out on the couch with his friends. Absolutely terrifying experience, one I always will remember. I don't know what that thing was, but it mimicked my siblings perfectly, their voices, their footsteps, and their actions. A little backstory. I was between 11 and 13 years old at the time. I'm turning 21 in October of this year. I was living with my biological mother at the time and my 3 younger siblings. I've disowned my mother, but that's a story for a different time. We'd recently moved to Blackpool from Scotland, and I had just made a new best friend who I was visiting when this happened. It was a fairly hot day, so I was wearing a tank top with a pair of short shorts and trainers, your average teenage get-up during hot summers. I'd spent the whole day at my friend's place and decided to head home when it started to get dark. To get to my friend's place from my home, you had to walk alongside a relatively busy main road and then cut through a small community park before walking across a few narrow streets. I was a dumbass teen at the time and thought that since I knew the route by heart, it would be a mere 10-minute walk. Walking home during the pitch-black night was a smart idea. Like I said, dumbass teen. I was walking along the main road just before the park when I happened to hear a car engine rev a little behind me. I took a quick glance while still walking, and I was determined to go home and get any chores I had left over done with and then go to sleep, so nothing was going to make me stop walking. But I noticed a red car crawling alongside me. I can't quite remember how the man inside looked, and this was a good while ago, but I remember that he looked significantly older than me, perhaps in his 30s or 40s. The man was looking me up and down without saying a word, the car still rolling alongside me as I walked. I'd already been through all the stranger danger lectures that parents and teachers give, so I decided to speed walk around a street corner, which led to the pedestrian entrance to the park. The car sped up to match my pace. I bolted towards the entrance of the park, and the car sped up with me. I didn't stop running until I was halfway into the park, just in case the guy jumped out of his car to grab me. I remember seeing the headlights of his car lighting up the entire tree line behind me as I stopped to catch my breath and calm myself down. Only, I wasn't able to stay calm for long. You see, the park was in a square shape, and the main road went right along the perimeter to the entrance, which is the end I had to leave through to get home. I remembered this just as I heard the car reversing and speeding alongside the long side of the park. Once again, I broke into a sprint through the entrance gate and alongside the main road just in time to spot the red car coming along behind me, stopping at a red traffic light. I spotted the car, and the guy driving it definitely spotted me, because as soon as that traffic light changed, he hit the gas to try to catch up to me. I bolted again to my home street, begging to any and all the currently existing gods that the car wouldn't be able to cut me off in one of the quieter streets before I got home. My home street was a dead end, and it takes forever for anybody parked there to turn their car around and leave, since it was also incredibly narrow. I guess this must have worked out in my favor, because as I bolted down the street, the red car just kind of hovered at the top rather than speeding behind me as it had been, before the driver finally gave up and drove off. I burst in through my house door, locked it behind me, and hid immediately in my room. I got screamed at the next day for waking the whole house up and not doing my chores when I got in. I didn't tell anyone because, A, my biological mother was unfortunately the type of woman who would accuse me of somehow bringing it on myself or for asking for it in my skimpy shorts. Like I said before, it was hot as hell during the day, and she cared more about her well-being than my own. And B, I feared that nobody would believe me even if I did tell them. At the time, unwary kids were being grabbed left, right, and center, so we were constantly being lectured about how strangers are dangerous and should never be approached. I have never seen that car again since, so I have no clue what happened to that guy after that night. This happened to me when I was about 16 years old. A friend of mine lived on the other side of our village, and it was quicker to get to his house on foot if you cut through a cemetery that was situated next to some train tracks. Now that I look back at it, I wonder why we didn't just walk down the train tracks every time we went to his house, but I guess that's neither here nor there. This one particular night, it was about 11:30 when I was leaving his place to go back to my house. I said goodbye and started making my way over the tracks and into the cemetery. I could see the lights of the big church at the far end and never felt weirded out by going through that shortcut. And honestly, I find cemeteries extremely peaceful and serene, even at night. I don't believe in any of that ghost jazz, and I certainly don't believe in zombies. So I was just enjoying a cigarette and making my way through the graves. I'm not sure the way it is in anyone else's town, but it was highly illegal for me to be out there, or anyone else for that matter, after dusk. For whatever reason, that simply was just a rule. However, I'm sure anyone who has any experience with cemeteries knows that there are always scumbags out there that will knock over headstones or steal flowers, and in the case of this cemetery, actually spray paint curse words and other nonsense on grave markers. I suppose that's probably why they don't want anyone out there at night. There was a rumor that one of the priests who lived in the rectory was always on duty and watching for anyone in the cemetery at night, but I don't think that was true because I never saw anyone out there doing anything like that. This night was pretty dark. I remember it was cloudy and there was no moon up, so I was relying on just whatever light was present to navigate my way through the graves. I always did my best to not walk directly next to them or over the graves, so just trying to be respectful, I was zigzagging my way through. I was about halfway there when I noticed something over at the far edge of the cemetery, closer to the railroad tracks. The tracks were actually elevated, so the ground sloped upwards into some trees, and then the tracks were on the other side. I noticed someone standing over a grave, and it looked like he was digging. I stopped and blinked to make sure I was seeing what I thought I was seeing, and it wasn't made up in my head. There was a guy standing there with a shovel. His back was to me, and he did not notice that I happened to be in the cemetery with him. I just stood staring at him, wondering what the hell he was doing. It certainly couldn't have been a caretaker. I mean, it was almost midnight at this point. Not wanting him to notice I was there, I kind of hunched over as I kept moving. And at one point, I looked over, and like an idiot, tripped over a stone vase that was next to a headstone. I had broken the cardinal rule of not walking on someone's grave, and now here I was tripping over something and landing on the ground with an oof. It was loud enough that the guy over by the edge of the cemetery heard it, and when I looked up, I could see he was looking around. I lay there for a moment, hoping that he didn't see me, but I could still see him from my position. My heart was going crazy, and I was out of my mind terrified that this guy was up to no good and would not be very nice to me if he spied where I was. But after a minute, he bent down, picked something up, grabbed his shovel, and started walking directly towards where I was. I knew I had a choice at this point. I could just lay there and hope that he would walk around me and not see me, or I could get up and haul my butt out of there as fast as I could. It didn't take me more than 30 seconds to make my choice, and I jumped to my feet ready to take off. Of course, this caught the guy's attention, and he immediately yelled out, "Hey!" I took off like Carl Lewis, hoping to get into the parking lot in front of the church before this guy could catch up with me. At one point, I looked behind me, and there he was, running after me. He was faster than me, and I could tell he was gaining. He no longer had the shovel in his hands, and he was moving quickly. I turned around and just went for it as fast as I could, and got into the parking lot where there were lights and just tore across it. At the far end was a street and an intersection that was at the edge of our little village. I knew there wouldn't be a lot of people out, but thought that if I could get to the street and the streetlights, this guy would stop chasing me. I did get to the street, turned around, and saw him about halfway through the parking lot, but he was just standing there staring at me. He didn't even say anything, he just stood there staring at me as I stared back at him. I hesitated for a moment, and then he finally turned around and started running back into the cemetery. I also turned and continued running home. When I got there, I burst into the house, and my parents were up watching one of those late shows. I was drenched in sweat and breathing heavily, and of course they wanted to know what the heck had just happened. I sat down, tried to catch my breath, and my mom said that I was as white as a sheet. Once I calmed down, I told them what I had seen, and my dad asked me, "Are you sure that's exactly what happened?" I love it. Back then, parents never believed anything kids said. Not like today, where kids seem to run the roost, and parents always take the side of their kid, despite the fact that he might be telling tall tales. I assured my dad that I did see the guy, and he did have a shovel, and he was doing something to a grave over by the edge of the train tracks. He got up and called the police, who said they would send someone out there to see what was going on. I decided to take a shower and just go to bed and try to forget what happened, and maybe even second-guess cutting through the cemetery again to either get to my friend's house or come back home after being there. The next day, my dad called the police back to see if anything was wrong, and they had sent a patrolman who drove through the little roads that wind through the cemetery with a spotlight on, but he didn't see anyone. But he let the church officials in the rectory know that there was a report of someone being out there. My dad thanked the officer and hung up. He then gave me a look like, "Did you make that up or not?" I knew what he meant, and I looked back at him and said, "Dad, I know what I saw. There was some guy out there." Well, it turns out there was someone out there, because it became the talk of the town later that day. The local newspaper did a story about it, and a TV station from the big town a few towns over came out to do a story on it too. A guy had been digging up graves and breaking into caskets or whatever. He was stealing any jewelry or valuables that had been placed inside of them, and the sick thing is, he was doing it to children's graves that were sometimes unmarked. That is so messed up in my mind. I mean, digging up graves is disgusting enough, but to do that to the grave of a child is beyond my comprehension. Eventually, the police did catch the guy. I can't remember exactly how they caught up with him, but I do remember they did. If I recall correctly, he had been doing the same thing at a different cemetery in the town over, and someone saw him and that's how they got him. I could be mistaken about that, but if my memory serves me right, that's what happened. That was a freaky night for me, and even though I vowed to never cut through there again, I did use the train tracks, always looking over to the side of the cemetery, thinking I would see someone else out there. I never did, and even though we weren't even supposed to be walking on the train tracks either, I felt safer doing that, and though it was against the law, it was still the fastest way to my friend's house. kids. Not always making the best decisions, but I guess I did, at least in this case. Hey gang, still on my short hiatus/vacation, but I wanted to give you a little taste of something. Hope you enjoyed it. Also, kicking off a t-shirt contest. In the comments below, I need to know your favorite scary movie. You can also enter on Twitter @ScaryUncleJosh. If you do it on Twitter, make sure you use the word t-shirt and then your movie. Good luck, everybody. It'll be a random drawing of all the responses I get.